Welcome to Let's Talk Wellness, where we will be sharing insights into the world of mental health and wellness as we explore traditional medicine and holistic healing options. It's time to have new conversations about mental health. Join Mara James, the founder and CEO of the Hugs for Life Healing Center, as she guides us along this journey. And now, let's talk wellness. Welcome to Let's Talk Wellness. I'm your host, Mara James, and I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Shari Becker, a licensed clinical psychologist, registered yoga teacher, and certified meditation teacher.
Hi, Mara.
How are you? Shari, it's so wild and crazy and amazing to see you. So if you would like to share with our guests watching and or listening, why it's so wild for us to see each other after so many years and kind of about our background together.
Absolutely, Mara. It would be my pleasure. So I have to say, you may not know this, but my first memory in my lifetime was the day that the James family moved in down the street from me on Ingram Street in Forest Hills, Queens, New York. And your in-laws walked into their home with, I guess it was 2 girls, and then in each arm they were carrying the twins, and one of those twins is Mara's husband, Kenny. And so I grew up down the street from the James family, and they were like a second family to me. So it's just amazing to be here with you right now. And each of us has had our own separate journey, and you're across the country from me right now. And yet here we are.
Amazing, right? Another silver lining from COVID. So you have done so much with your life, with your family. If you want to talk a little bit about a little bit about your family life, your amazing children, and then you could share with us about your professional life.
I would love to. So I am incredibly blessed to actually be celebrating my 30th wedding anniversary with my husband, Dan. We met in law school at NYU Law School exactly 35 years ago. And talk about miracles, Mara. About a month ago, I guess it was the end of August, we moved our oldest son, Zach, into the same dorm at NYU Law School that my husband and I lived in.
My whole body has chills right now. Wow. Wow.
Coming full circle in life, right?
Absolutely.
So I am thrilled that he's there. He's at a place that Dan and I both loved. And so together we have 3 sons. So I am the very proud mom of Zach, who's about to be 25, and Matt, who is 22, and Justin, who is 20. And it's been a real journey for me to raise 3 boys into young men. I know nothing about sports. It's like they're speaking a different language every time they sit down and talk about sports, which is the primary topic of conversation. And it's just been my absolute privilege and pleasure. And yes, it's been difficult and challenging, and I've learned so much, but just grateful to be in that position today. And amazed too that we're at this point where they are grown and doing their own thing.
So you said you met your husband at law school. And what I've noticed is that my intro of you did not include lawyer, but it talked more about clinical psychologist and all these other amazing things. So can you talk about that transition?
Absolutely, especially Mara, because I do feel that it was a very significant part of my journey. So when I was in college, junior year, I was deciding between, should I go to law school or should I go on to get a PhD in psychology? I was a psychology major. And my thinking about it at the time was really interesting. I remember thinking I had some sense of myself as being successful in the business world, and that the way to do that was the man's way. And that meant going to law school. And so I chose that path for myself first, and did not like law school at all. And my dad, who had his own interesting life story, he was a Holocaust survivor. He became a building contractor. He had a lot of trouble earning an adequate living to support his family. And he really wanted me to be an attorney. He felt that I would be able to use my academic skills to be able to support myself. And at that time, I just didn't have the strategies to be able to make my own choices for myself and stand up for myself. And so I continued on the path that he chose for me until I could no longer do that, which was 2 years into practicing law.
Wow.
And at that time, I was, married, and I felt personally ready. I had been in therapy for probably about 3 years at that time, and I was ready to not ask for permission, but to acknowledge that I was not happy, that I didn't feel fulfilled in the work that I was doing, and I was going to make a change. And I went back to school and I got my PhD in clinical psychology.
Wow. And I didn't even know we were going to go here with this conversation today, but it's so profound. A child wanting to make their parent happy and following in what they thought that they should do to make the parent happy, as opposed to following their own heart, which ends in a great story for you because you did make that transition. But how many children are out there that aren't doing what makes them happy? They did it for the wrong reasons, and the emotions that they're encountering now, I'm sure you can shed some light on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most difficult emotions for people to sit with is regret.
Mm.
And I think that when we make choices that build one upon the next, or we just allow the choices to be made for us, we end up, I think, building maybe resentment, but often a sense of regret that we did not live the life that we would have chosen for ourselves. And there's a lot of pain in that and a lot of struggle. And then sometimes we start to see symptoms, right? Like anxiety, depressed mood, things like that, that obviously can be diagnosed in a clinical setting, but really it's about lifestyle, and it's about choices that we've made, and about emotions that we're not processing because we feel like we don't have a choice.
Not having a choice. Wow. And that's just an illusion, because we have so many choices, but when we're stuck in that world, very powerful. So tell us now about the transition, about going to obtain your PhD. And then after that, how you were led to become a registered yoga teacher and the meditation teacher.
Yeah, and it's so amazing sort of to hear you say it this way, Mara, because you could just kind of get this sense of how our lives unfold as a journey, right? How just
Sure.
one thing leads into the next, leads into the next. So I applied to doctoral programs in clinical psychology, and the one that was the best fit for me at the time ended up being Fairleigh Dickinson in Teaneck, New Jersey. So we moved out of New York City to a state that might as well have been Alaska for me, because I was such a New Yorker. And I never imagined that I would end up in New Jersey. And so we moved out here so that I could go to school here. And I really enjoyed graduate school. I could just tell the difference. Truthfully, I'm going to raise the word soul because that's how it felt to me, that choice and where I was at that time felt much more in alignment with my soul than being a lawyer did. I could just feel it. I could sense that here I am, and this is where I belong. And so, yeah, 5 years later, and including one child later, I got my PhD because I guess at some point I started having children during that journey. And then started practicing, and a very small private practice at first, because I wanted to balance my work life with my mom life, my home life. And I was fortunately able to do that. I had that choice. And so then, probably like pretty soon after I started practicing as a clinical psychologist, I found a yoga studio locally. And, it sounds a little hokey, but from the first time I practiced in that studio with that particular teacher, I felt at home. I don't identify myself as an athlete. I never played sports, but I always liked to be active and to exercise. And I found that yoga, in the way that it was taught by this teacher, it challenged me physically, and it really helped me also access the teachings of yoga that she was brilliant at teaching. And so very early on into my yoga practice, I became aware that a lot of the yogic teachings could help me in my own life. It was so easy for me to see, like, oh, that could apply to that situation I'm in, or that could apply to this situation. And then I couldn't help by extending that process to my patients and what they were going through. The thing is, though, as a psychologist, you're taught that there are certain rules, and there's a certain box that you need to stay within. Like there's this like imaginary like therapy police that are going to come and keep you away if you violate these regulations. And so it's a little bit tentative at first about introducing the yogic teachings into my work as a psychologist. And I proceeded cautiously and gently, and I asked permission from my patients one by one, if they were interested in hearing something that I had learned in yoga that might apply to this situation. And then, 20 years later, I've been doing that kind of flow with them for 20 years, and it just feels so seamless and natural now. Not only have I integrated yogic teachings into my work as a psychologist, but there have been other modalities that I've also studied and incorporated, including, for example, positive psychology and mindfulness in particular. But honestly, Mara, I just feel like there's wisdom everywhere. So, if I'm watching Ted Lasso, or if I'm talking to one of my kids, or just anything that I come across that might be helpful and relevant gets brought into the mix.
Absolutely. Nice and easy. So that's a great word. I've done yoga. I had my manic episode in spiritual awakening 7 years ago, and I would never have done yoga. I couldn't have slowed down to do it before that. And it was time for me to enter, my yoga studio, but I haven't heard that terminology, yoga teachings. So I'd love to hear, you said something about positive. I forgot what the second word was, but if you can talk a little more about that, because as you're aware, and most people are aware, the Hugs for Life Healing Center, which is part of ELF, Extraordinary Lives Foundation, the mission is to bridge that gap between medical professionals, approved holistic healers, which includes yoga studios and meditation. So if we can talk about that, it'd be profound.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very big topic, so I can certainly touch upon it, because, I mean, for me, it's just so humbling, honestly. And even after practicing for 20 years, I've probably maybe touched the tip of the iceberg on what there is to offer. So I was very fortunate in that I trained to be a yoga teacher, and as a volunteer went into mental health settings. I taught this basically a style of yoga that I created. I'm sure other people teach it, but I created it specifically because each week I would go into this intensive outpatient psychiatric setting, and I wouldn't know who would be there to meet me that day. I wouldn't know if there would be a lot of people who are experiencing depression and the mood would be really low, the energy would be quiet. I wouldn't know if the mood would be anxious or more manic, and I would need to start with a walking mindful meditation. And so I really believe that there's different types of yoga practice for different types of people. But there are so many teachings, including, I'll just start with my yoga class today. The theme I used was based on ahimsa, which is non-violence, non-harming. It's part of the 10 commandments of yoga, one of the first 2 of the 8 limbs of yoga. And so ahimsa, I used and interpreted today as self-care. And so I taught my class inspired by the principle of ahimsa and invited the yoga students to use each pose, each transition between poses, and even each breath that they took as an act of self-care.
Oh,
so that would be an example of how I would weave a yoga teaching into a yoga class. And an example of how I might bring it into my psychotherapy practice might be to help shift perspective. For example, if somebody is going through a very challenging time in their lives, to see that, as you did, by the way, personally, to see that challenge as an opportunity for growth and transformation. And when people are suffering and struggling, they're not always open to hearing that. But honestly, in my mind and from my perspective as the therapist, I'm wondering, I wonder why this is happening in this person's life right now. What is the opportunity that is here for them that they may not be willing or able to see right now, but that I, as the therapist, I'm going to keep in the back of my mind that inquiry.
I love that. Yeah. Gosh, there's so many questions and so many statements. I don't know where to start. So I love the practice, the idea of gratitude. And you said something, and I'm not good at quoting, but like when you teach them, like the self-care is just as simple as the breath. And so many of us take breathing for granted. It's just something we do, whether or not we think about it. But to like be mindful and grateful that we have, air to breathe and that we could take the next breath and it could nurture our body and soul is so profound. So thank you for bringing that to my attention and everybody else's. Wow. And I do love also the thought of meeting the person where they're at and when it's time and if it's time to start, planting seeds about alternative ways to be, to think, to feel. Shari, Dr. Shari, we're going to take a brief break and we're going to be right back and we're going to get into some really juicy stuff. So hold on, everybody. We'll be right back.
In these shifting and changing times, more and more lives are being impacted by mental health. The Extraordinary Lives Foundation, also known as ELF, is transforming the way people view and navigate mental health challenges. Their mission is to improve children's mental health and wellness and support families by providing educational tools, resources, and awareness events. ELF encourages families to recognize symptoms, overcome the stigma, and reach out for help. Through prevention, early intervention, and holistic treatment, we believe many of the big problems facing today's youth can be transformed within a generation. Extraordinary Lives Foundation is excited to offer the Hugs for Life Healing Center, growing a worldwide network of approved holistic healers and bridging the gap between traditional and complementary healing options. visit the Extraordinary Lives Foundation website at www.elfempowers.org to find out more about their resources and events. Together, we can change the conversation around mental health. We hope that you're enjoying today's Let's Talk Wellness podcast. And if you have a topic that you would like us to explore, we would love to hear from you. Simply email us at info@elfempowers.org. That's info@elfempowers.org. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Wellness. I'm your host, Mara James, and today we have Dr. Shari Becker, a licensed clinical psychologist, registered yoga teacher, and certified meditation teacher.
Hi, Mara. So good to be back.
Hi there. So you shared some really great information with us, and I always personally love to hear stories that fill your heart and soul that you would like to share with us. Obviously, not saying any names. We don't want to break any HIPAA. So if you could start us off with that, it'd be great.
Absolutely. I would love to. So this story in particular actually just came up this week, and it warms my heart so much because this woman is in her late 60s. And she came to me a couple of years ago, actually because she was struggling with her weight. So it was like this kind of more outer experience that she was having. And again, I've become really curious, like what's really bringing her to me? What is this journey going to be like for her? And, for her to be able to take care of herself in a meaningful way. I don't focus on people's weight, actually. I focus on what are the obstacles in their way of taking care of themselves in a way that reflects self-love and self-compassion. Why do they continue to make choices and decisions that are not serving them well? So this woman has been very actively involved in her work and accepting the challenges that have come her way. So she came in the other day and she's really excited and proud of herself to share this story. We've been working on boundaries and interpersonal boundaries and self-care and mindful decision-making. And so her adult son called her to say, hey, Mom, Grandma, how do you feel about babysitting for the grandkids tomorrow when we go to back to school night? And she, as a lot of people do, work on habitual patterned responses, right? So she said, oh, of course. And then her son said, oh, by the way, just want to let you know, the kids both have stomach viruses. And my patient happens to live with her father, who's in his 90s and who's fragile medically. And she said, okay, no problem. I can handle it, because that's her habitual pattern response, is not to check in with herself and not to be mindful, but just to say yes. And then what she usually does, and she reported this to me, is she gets a stomach ache and takes Imodium, which she has carried around in her bag with her for 30 years. So this time she got off the phone with her son, and she noticed, because she's been practicing mindfulness, that her belly was yelling at her. Her belly was constricted and hurting and speaking to her in the language of sensation. And she noticed and paid attention to that. And she started going through the mindful decision-making practice that I had just taught her the week before, where she checked in with herself and said, does this make sense? And she said, no, this doesn't make sense at all. My dad is 90 something. I'm 60 something. I am not going to babysit for those kids. And so she checked in with that and how that felt in her body. And she said, that feels like a yes. And she called her son and she let him know that this time she wouldn't be able to babysit for the kids as much as she always loves to, but that she needed to prioritize her health and her father's health, and that she hoped that he would find somebody else who could do it. So it's just amazing to see someone really putting the work that, all of the work that she's doing got put into action. And she was able to notice she didn't have a stomachache then.
Amazing. And it sounds like, I don't have a degree, you do that, but that she's been a people pleaser her whole life. And she just took a stand for herself and her son. I can't even imagine what went through his head. But, because mom probably never said no to him. And to finally say no, but for the right reasons, out of love, not anger, must have been profound in their relationship.
Yeah, I think she's been showing him what she's been working on throughout. And thankfully, I think he loves her enough to be really open to the work that she's doing for herself and for him and for the next generation.
Wow, wow, wow. Um, that is amazing. Is there another story that comes to mind that you would like to share?
Hmm.
And now, do you work with adults, children, parents? Like, who are your primary clients, patients?
I work with people who are 17 and older. I
Okay.
made that decision probably within a year or two after I first started practicing.
Hmm.
I actually don't think that my strong suit is working with children. And what I learned was that if the parents didn't like what the child was doing in session, they could decide not to drive them to therapy. I once had a 16-year-old girl walk a mile in the snow to my office because her father didn't appreciate the separation and individuation process that she was going through in the therapy. And she felt strongly enough that she got herself there. But that was a learning moment for me. And so basically, you're allowed to drive at 17 in New Jersey. And so that's my limit. It's
Oh,
amazing right now. I see somebody who's 70, see a lot more people right now who are in their 60s who have recognized, especially I think during the pandemic, that life is short
mhm.
and that they've been living a certain lifestyle, making certain choices, and they really want to turn things around for the remainder of their lives. It's very inspiring, Mara.
Wow. So you've seen a big shift as a result of COVID.
Yes, I've seen mostly people being so much more inspired and committed to their own personal therapeutic journey, to creating the life that they envision themselves having. It's kind of like time's up. Like
Yeah.
all these excuses that I've been making for not doing this and not doing that, time's up. It's now or never. And obviously, COVID has been enormously difficult and people have struggled tremendously. And also, and that's the beauty of positive psychology, right? They give us the and. Things have been very challenging. And I think there's been a lot of inspiration that I've seen for people to show up in their lives more vibrantly. And that's kind of how I end up with you here today. I've been writing, I've been speaking, so many things that I had said to myself that I wanted to do professionally. Things were holding me back. It's now or never.
It's
People really need the help right now. It's not fair for me to not talk.
No, absolutely. You have a mission, you have a purpose here and to share. And what's beautiful is that my next question was going to be if you do things virtually and or in person, but the fact that we have Zoom, so we have access to over 5 billion people in the world that anybody can choose to watch or listen to anybody, and you don't have to be there physically, is so profound. So one question is, do you do things virtually and or in person? Well, that's the first question. Let's go there.
One of the exciting things that I really want to share with you today, something that came out of COVID for me that I don't know that I ever would have started, but was sort of a back in my mind dream, was I teach an online weekly mindfulness meditation class It's 30 minutes long. It is free. It is open to anybody. And I have to tell you this adorable, amazing story. So when the pandemic hit, I said, I have to offer this meditation class. And so I told my synagogue, I sent them an email. I said, I'm going to be offering this. Please put it out there to the membership. It is free. Everyone is welcome. And so I have people in their 80s who never in a million years thought they would be practicing meditation, now sitting for a year and a half every week. And there are other people as well, people of all ages, people come and go, but we have like this kind of regular community. Some of them are widowed, Mara, and they live alone. And they're before people were going out and before people were vaccinated. It is the most touching, humbling experience every Thursday morning at 8:30 to know that these people are just waiting to say good morning to somebody.
Yes, and to feel that connection, and to clarify, that's 8:30 Eastern time, 5:30 Western times, Pacific time. So not sure you get many of us to wake up that early, but that's so you just created a community which will help these people feel more connected, less depressed. Thank you for doing that. Thank you on behalf of them, and because that is beautiful, profound. Yeah, and do you do individual sessions on Zoom, or are those mostly in person?
Oh, so just back to the meditation, just if
Yes,
anything,
yes, of course.
I record them every week because some people like to have the recording, and then some people can't make it at 8:30 in the morning. So if there are any West Coast people or anybody who's interested, they can just email me and I'll give you the information later. And I would be happy to put them on my email distribution list and they can have access. And really each week there's a theme. It's, I mean, I wouldn't call it mental health theme per se, but it really is, it's really about, just kind of like ideas from everywhere about how to help enhance the quality of our lives. Yeah.
And do you have a website that you list those on as well? Or is it just
I have a website, but I'm not so tech advanced that I have them listed right now. I'm moving in that direction. And I do also, in answer to your question, the laws are in flux right now about providing mental health care through telehealth, but I do see patients virtually. Certainly we all were doing that during the pandemic. And also once I was vaccinated and people in my office suite were vaccinated, we are welcoming anybody who is vaccinated into the office who wants to come in person. And that's been really special and just very, again, moving to be able to come back into the in-person, and also so grateful for the online option for people who aren't interested, willing, or able to come in person.
For sure. You mentioned positive psychology, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about that. I've always heard, don't use the word but, use the word and I've started doing that, and it's beautiful. Can you talk to us a little bit, share what those two words, very powerful words, actually mean?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So positive psychology, actually, I believe, was brought to life by Dr. Martin Seligman, who originally coined the term learned helplessness, and then shifted his thinking about mental health and started focusing on learned optimism. And so there are many other instructors and people who study and teach positive psychology, including Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar, Dr. Maria Sirois, and they are just a wealth of information about this topic. But what I love about positive psychology is like the authenticity of it, right? Because there are people who kind of say affirmations like, oh, you just have to think positive, or you just have to move on and just have to let it go. And I always kind of say to people, like, that just is 5 years of therapy right there. These are like
minimum.
long processes, and we don't want to minimize the challenge and the difficulty. And we also want to acknowledge that in life, there are many reasons to feel grateful and hopeful. There's the silver lining, right? And we want to acknowledge that both are happening simultaneously. One of the things that I love about positive psychology is that they offer specific strategies, including the and. They have languaging that's really helpful. For example, one of my favorites is give yourself permission to be human. There's something about that line. One of the perfect times that it was applied for me was I was kind of, in Brene Brown's words, having a shame storm about something that I had said and done to a friend on her birthday. And like, there was just no excuse. There was no excusing it. There was no explaining it. I happen to think I was way more upset about it than she was. But the shame is another one. Like, regret is so brutally difficult. Shame is another powerfully painful emotion that people experience, because we just want to run for the hills. We want to get out of our skin. We want to blame somebody else. We want to numb it out. Get me out of this experience. But what that line did when I called my friend who did the 10-month positive psychology course, I didn't even tell her the story. She didn't have time to hear it. She just said, whatever it is, go into child's pose on your yoga mat for 15 minutes and give yourself permission to be human.
I just want to cry because I'm picturing myself doing that and the tears coming out, that like little girl, because those, yeah, wow. You said the just word and how that leads, right? Because what about this? Because I, going through a healing journey with my father who recently passed away at 99, and my husband's like, you have to go visit him, or the have tos or the shoulds. Is that any part of this positive psychology?
So I don't know about whether it's a part of positive psychology. I will tell you, in my office, my patients know that there are certain words that sort of we don't use because they're not helpful. They include good, bad, should, and shouldn't, right? Because those are all terms of judgment.
Yes.
And generally, I find them to be unhelpful in our decision-making process.
So good,
Bad,
shouldn't. So instead of saying I shouldn't have yada yada, how do we rephrase it? How do we rethink it?
Well, I guess one thing you could do is you could say something along the lines of, I feel obligated to go visit my father. There's a part of me that feels obligated to visit my father. And there's a part of me that is very aware that I feel very resistant to visiting him.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And work with that, right?
Yeah. That's beautiful. We're going to talk offline about this class because I'm now very interested. Who knew we would always continue to grow and learn more. Yeah, Shari, our time has flown. So before we share your contact information, the best way to get in touch with you, are there any last words of wisdom that you'd like to share with us?
I think that the research has shown that gratitude is a very powerful practice. And again, remembering to honor that part that's difficult and challenging, and to try to find a way to cultivate gratitude as a regular practice, because if we don't use it, we really don't strengthen the gratitude muscles. And gratitude happens, we want it to happen in the body. We want to feel it. We want to feel the sensations in the heart, the tenderness, the openness, the warmth those sensations that are associated with the emotion of gratitude. Otherwise, it's just a word we throw around. Yeah.
Right. And just saying that I felt it, it made me smile. What word would you use for like 3 to 7 year olds? For gratitude's a big word. What's a little word for that?
Thank you.
The thank you. Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah. And thank you from the heart, not because I should say it, but because I feel like thank you for this. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So what's the best way to get in touch with you?
The best way to reach me is through email.
Okay.
My email address is Shari A. Becker, PhD @gmail.com. I also do have a website, drsharibecker.com, and all of my contact information is there. And I would welcome the opportunity to hear from you.
And social media? Are you on any platforms?
Professionally, I am on Instagram, and usually I will post if I write a blog, if I have blog posts that are all on my website, and I actually hope that you'll check them out because I really dug down deep to write some of them, and they're very, hopefully you'll find them interesting and relatable. But Dr. Shari Becker, and also I think Twitter, no Twitter, Instagram is at Dr. Shari Becker. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So
And
Shari Becker, PhD @Gmail, website drsharibecker.com, Instagram @drsharibecker.
beautiful. And we'll put that all in the text here. And okay. And did you say you do have a newsletter that you send out?
I do. I send out an email probably about once a month at this point.
Perfect.
It'll list all of the activities that are going on, my new blog posts, the series that I might be running, or any, and the regular yoga, mindfulness-based gentle yoga class that I teach on Tuesdays,
Okay.
and the weekly meditation class on Thursday mornings.
Beautiful. Shari, it has been such a pleasure reconnecting with you after all these years. I am so grateful to you and for what you bring to this world. And don't forget that you and all of our friends out there, you are amazing.
Oh, Mara, thank you so much for having me. I really love joining you today, and so great to see you again.
Take care.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Let's Talk Wellness. This podcast has been brought to you by the Hugs for Life Healing Center, a division of the Extraordinary Lives Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. If you would like to listen to more conversations like this, we invite you to subscribe to our mailing list at www.elfempowers.org to be notified when our weekly episodes are published. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to bringing you our next conversation on Let's Talk Wellness.